What does Darth Sidious do with Force sensitives in his own empire? Greetings again, Acolytes, and welcome back to the Archives. The advent of Order 66 saw the Jedi completely wiped from the galaxy. What survivors remained were either hunted down by Lord Vader or the Inquisitors, or they were driven too deeply underground that they could make no impact on the galactic stage. Darth Sidious wanted himself and Vader to represent the ultimate forceful beings in the universe, but that didn't necessarily mean that he would just execute anyone who was Force sensitive. A lot of the time, we see Palpatine inducting Force sensitives into his empire for one position or another. In canon, he even went after a Jedi crystal containing the locations of Force sensitive children. For us though, this begs the question, just what is Palpatine's approach to using forceful beings in the Empire? Are they all just collectively thrown into the Inquisitors, or is there more to it? Well, join us today as we crack open the classified Imperial files in order to find out what the Emperor does with Force sensitives that he discovers in the ranks of his own beautiful empire. Darth Sidious by nature believes that those who can touch the Force are innately better than those that cannot. In his mind, it fits the survival of the fittest mold. For eons, beings have evolved into better versions of themselves to climb the galactic food chain. But now that all beings have reached a point of sentience and advancement with tools and technology, the realm of the Force is the final frontier of evolution to Palpatine. Force sensitivity is incredibly rare, which is why those that have it are so special. American author Michael Lind did some extensive research into the lore of Star Wars and loosely calculated that the percentage of Force sensitivity occurs in the galactic population in only about 0.0067%. That's roughly about 67 in every 1 million. Rounding a little bit, that would make the number roughly 1 in every 15,000 people that can touch the Force in any capacity. With numbers like that, forceful beings are not only rare, but incredibly valuable. Even the ones that cannot manifest the Force in the physical world through telekinesis are special. Those with any capacity to wield it usually have some measure of precognition and lightning-fast reflexes, making them excellent warriors, pilots, and gamblers. The reason we bring this up is because Sidious often cites that as the very reason that he believes forceful beings are inherently better than normal people. And it's all the better if all of those who are forceful learn to use the dark side as well. In the Book of the Sith, one of Palpatine's annotations writes this: "Those who can touch the dark side have sight where others are blind. They must always lead those who lack that ability." Contrary to popular belief, Sidious doesn't perceive them as a real threat to him whatsoever. He actually enjoys when he finds Force sensitives within his empire, and he gets excited when they show a substantial amount of potential. But let's be perfectly clear, most of the time he has no interest in replacing Vader, or even some of his less powerful agents such as Emperor's Hands or even the Inquisitors. Even a fraction of Vader's power, 99.9% of the population, falls utterly short to the absolute terror that the Dark Lord commands. This is important, as it tells us why Darth Sidious didn't spend a whole lot of time searching for a new apprentice. Even in his broken state, Vader's power still supersedes what most of the galaxy can offer at their prime. There was a way that Palpatine utilized Force sensitives that really had nothing to do with the Sith. The rule of two remains in effect between Vader and Sidious, even if it has technically been fulfilled. Maintaining the status quo of two Sith was a better deal. The two already spent so much time eyeing each other suspiciously, it would get way too complicated to add someone else that they had to look out for. However, this did not mean that Palpatine could not advance his own desires with the rule of one. This was a doctrinal plan that Darth Sidious had been concocting ever since he had the idea to create his own empire. He explained the essence of the rule of one in his manifesto, which can be found in the Book of the Sith. There he writes this: "As Darth Bane instituted the rule of two, so I will begin the rule of one. The Sith will now be sustained by one to hold the power, and others, talented in the Force, to execute my will as dark side agents." He explains in greater detail by saying this: "As the rule of one is enacted, I will be free to enlist a throng of dark side followers. These talented mimics will be trained to replicate a smatter of my abilities, yet will never be even a fraction of my authority." This was the ultimate goal, to create a society where those with the dark side ruled, answerable only to their immortal Emperor Sidious. But just as the Senate couldn't know about the Death Star until it was completed with their committee abolished, so too could the officers and the agents of the Empire not know about Palpatine's own power until it would be far too late for them. Until Force sensitives were the ones running things, Palpatine was always playing the long game. He often found any forceful beings he could get his hands on and then trained them in the ways of the dark side. Then he would appraise their aptitudes and sort them into his various organizations around the Empire. Usually they were placed in positions of reasonable authority at first, able to command around other non-Force sensitives in the Empire, but always answerable to Vader and, of course, the Emperor. There were, of course, exceptions also to them being answerable to Vader, but we'll get to this in a moment. The Force sensitives that Palpatine finds can come from anywhere. He doesn't appear to have a preference. However, we did notice that he's not scouring the streets and planet sides for all of them the way that the Jedi had. Rather, Sidious allows them to naturally rise through the ranks of the Empire, or some rare cases, captured Jedi. In adherence to the Sith philosophy, Sidious didn't want just anyone who could touch the Force. He wanted beings who had experienced life's greatest sufferings, beings who had things taken from them, who had already experienced pain and trauma. It wasn't enough for them to be Force sensitive. He wanted them to be broken, ripe for dark side harvest. The first of these were captured Padawans and members of the Jedi Service Corps. For those of you who may not remember, the Jedi Service Corps was a branch of the Jedi Order that was much more humble and occupied jobs in the galaxy by serving the needs of civilians and the wider citizens of the galaxy. The Agri Corps were used the living force to promote agricultural growth in impoverished worlds. The Medicorps were field medics or temple doctors. The Explore Corps charted unknown planets and made first contact with brand new species. The Edu-Corps worked in the archives under Jocasta Nu, but that's the very brief explanation of it anyway. But they were often comprised of Jedi Knights and Masters that had a lower aptitude in the Force, or just never felt comfortable in the other areas of Jedi life. This was largely made up of Padawans that had never passed their trials. Many of these Service Corps members, particularly those in the Agri Corps and the Explore Corps, survived the initial waves of Order 66, mainly due to the fact that they are so incredibly spread out, meaning many of them were not killed outright, but rounded up and taken to Palpatine's secret fortress on the world of Biss. There, they would be placed in a dingy room with other Padawans and left to starve while soaking in the energies of the world, a terrible place tainted by the dark side. Vader and Palpatine made a personal visit to them. Vader would command them all to engage in combat, and those that survived got to live and serve the Emperor. The Padawans, desperate, broken, began slaughtering each other in a bloodbath. As Vader observed, he was impressed with only a few of them, 4 to be exact: Antinous Tremaine, Gweblib Luif, Lanu Pasik, and Halmir. He commanded them to stop, took the 4 Padawans, and he had the rest of the room executed. Later, Palpatine would write this in the Book of the Sith: the captured Padawan survivors from the Jedi Service Corps are less gifted in the Force, but they will serve me nonetheless as Dark Side Adepts. Until I have use for them, they shall remain on Biss, where their connection to the Force will intensify the planet's growing nexus of dark side potency. On Biss, Palpatine carried out all sorts of dark side experiments and rituals that involved drawing the life force out of the inhabitants. The planet looked like a tropical vacation paradise. Palpatine advertised it as the most beautiful place in the Empire, particularly to the people of Alderaan who had lost their home. But it was all a farce. While people were living it up on the world of Biss in luxury, they did not know that their very life energy was being drained and funneled into every growing dark side nexus that Palpatine could get his hands on. And so now, Sidious had decided to do this with some of his newest Inquisitors. This just goes to prove that even if you think someone has too little potential for Palpatine's notice, he will still use them in some sort of depraved way anyway. Once he is his Jedi or whatever Force sensitive he wants in his possession, he will undertake the process of transforming them into a dark side adept, as he calls them, and that process involves breaking their spirit, training them to embrace the dark side as their only support. He explains this process by writing in the Book of Anger. Although the Jedi Order has been obliterated, many Force sensitives have now survived. Those who still hold to the belief that there is virtue in peace, or in closing oneself off to sensation, will be made to conform. They must find value in the ways of the dark side. Unleashing their anger is fundamental for drawing them into my fold, as well as for them to gain an understanding of the dark. For it is in anger that Force users are strongest. Once tapped, this emotion can turn idealists into slaves, even those with brightly burning passions. Those who vow to resist with their dying breath can be broken in 3 simple steps. First, they must be tempted. The strong-willed always have something they desire, or something they possess that they fear to lose. They will see their drive to protect this item as noble. By encouraging this delusion, a puppet is created. Second, the puppets must be tested. By creating an immediate danger or placing subjects in peril, they will be forced to make a decision. Crazed by fear and the mere thought of losing what they hold so dear, they will do anything that is asked of them, if only to preserve their most cherished desires. Third, they must be forced to submit. A moment will arise when they will take a step too far, in panic or in fear. They will hurt others or commit a crime in such a way that the outside world will never forgive them. After that moment, there is no return from the dark side. Some who have been ensnared will choose to end their lives. Most, however, will accept their role as new warriors of the dark side. One life is ended, and a better one has begun. This chilling explanation characterizes the mindset and process that Palpatine takes into crushing the will of Force sensitives. He did this with a young Jedi prisoner by the name of Ferrus Olin, a particular boy with a strong connection to the Force who desired to kill Vader more than anything. Sidious decided to take advantage of that desire and promised him knowledge to accomplish that goal. To Ferrus, he went beyond simply turning him to the dark side. Sidious gave him real Sith training and even a Sith holocron. He placed him in the Inquisitorius for a brief time just to get him into combat, but he kept a skeptical eye on Olin during the entire process. Yet the Inquisitorius wasn't the only place for Force sensitives. Palpatine didn't want to make just one order of beings, but rather several, each order given a specific task based on their aptitude. One might even say that the Inquisitors were one of the weakest branches of Palpatine's network of Force-sensitive underlings. The two other main groups that Palpatine had were the Shadow Guards and the Emperor's Hands. The Shadow Guards were an elevation from the red-robed Royal Guards, and despite most of them being non-Force sensitive, they were trained to have the fighting capabilities and reaction speed of a full-blown Jedi Knight. But from the few among their already elite order, some showed an amount of power within the Force. They were then elevated to the Imperial Shadow Guard. True to their name, they retained the style of their robes and armor, but instead of all red, it was colored entirely black with a red visor. Instead of stun pikes and blasters, the Shadow Guard were equipped with red-bladed lightsaber pikes. These were lightsabers with spear-like extensions on the hilt in order to give them better reach. The Shadow Guards made very rare appearances in the Empire, as they were only sent out on extremely special and difficult missions, such as when Starkiller was roaming around causing issues. But that is the level of the situation it takes for them to be deployed. The other order was the Emperor's Hands. They were unique in that Palpatine gave them special attention. Just like the Shadow Guards were taken from the Royal Guards, the Emperor's Hands were brought up by the ranks of the Inquisitors. Though this was not always the case, the Hands were elite agents all of the time, and were picked by Palpatine personally for their power and stealth abilities. They were meant to be the unseen enforcers of the Emperor's will, those that carried out highly secretive and specialized missions for Palpatine himself that the rest of the Empire could not know about. They had a more delicate touch than Vader usually did, and not to mention, there were things that Sidious needed to have taken care of that he didn't want Vader knowing about. All received some form of specialized training directly from Sidious. But the most unique thing about their order is that each one of the Emperor's Hands were completely ignorant of the others. It was revealed that all of the Hands thought that they were the only one, which made them insanely loyal to Palpatine because he made them feel special and valued. In truth, this was a manipulation tactic. However, he did have a favorite, Mara Jade. Mara Jade was a girl not from the Inquisitors, but strangely, Sidious had taken her from her parents as a small child to be trained. Neither the Shadow Guards nor the Emperor's Hands were subject to the authority of Lord Vader. It was only when Palpatine expressly told them that they were to take his orders did they ever do so. This further serves to raise this level of importance within the Empire. Now, of course, that's not to say that the Inquisitors were too weak for notice, as one Inquisitor by the name of Jarek rose to rival Vader's own strength, but he and the rest of them were still subject to the Dark Lord's authority. The Emperor's apprentice was not fond of any of the other Force sensitives in the Empire. At best, he saw them as weak, petty, and inept. At worst, he found them to be a hindrance or a threat. But he didn't despise any of them as much as he did the Emperor's Hands, simply because of their sheer arrogance, the audacity in thinking that they were something special to the Emperor, which they felt the need to rub in Vader's face whenever they could. But Vader knew the truth, of course. He wasn't allowed to reveal it to them, though. And to the Hands, they were none the wiser. And among them, of course, there was none that Vader hated more than his master's favorite, Mara Jade. Because she was his favorite, she had a different level of knowledge about the Sith and the inner workings of the Empire. Mara Jade constantly tried to rival and undermine Vader in order to curry Sidious's favor, and if that wasn't bad enough, she was allowed to be present whenever Palpatine punished Vader, adding humiliation. But anyway, my friends, this was Palpatine's personal approach to dealing with Force sensitives in the Empire. Despite his desire to see the Jedi completely obliterated, it would be a mistake to think that he wanted all those who could touch the Force gone. Sometimes they were a liability, sure, especially if they had interacted with the Jedi, but they were almost always useful in some capacity. His dream was to build something far beyond what the Empire had, and even beyond the Sith Order. He had a vision of the rule of one, a society where he was on top and he had a myriad of Dark Side Adepts to do his bidding. This was different from the old Sith way because none of his adepts were actually Sith, nor did they have any real Sith training. Therefore, they would all be so much weaker than he was. Even their combined strength would not avail them. So in the meantime, he would pull them all to darkness, then sort them into the various places in the Empire, and then the galaxy, fully run by both those he perceived as worthy to rule at the very top of the food chain, but never close to him. But again, my friends, thank you so much for joining us today, Acolytes. May the Force be with you, and have an amazing day.